One of the mistakes a lot of people make when it comes to socializing is they'll feel this internal lack in themselves. So they may feel like they're not very interesting, or they've been told before, oh, why do you speak like a robot? Be a little bit more expressive, right? And then they will take that story in, they will go, okay, I am not a charismatic person. And they will carry that story. And what they'll try to do is to fight against that story. They will start taking on all these strategies. In today's episode of the Data Driven Actualization podcast, we talk about how to use socializing as a path to mastering your mind and to heal. We show you the 3 types of faulty mental programs that show up in social situations and how to let go of each one of them. Interjections work the same way. These are false beliefs we take away from the outside world, from our environment or from someone else, and we make it mean something about ourselves. And we teach you the 5 stages of healing that you can use as a lens to look at social situations from and to identify your symptoms, your triggers, and your unhelpful stories around social situations so you can turn any social experience as an opportunity to grow, regardless of whether the conversation goes well or not. From the symptom, we can identify the trigger. To identify the trigger, we ask ourselves, what happens right before this symptom arises? And we get very specific around what that trigger is. This is a culmination of our lessons from the past 5 years, talking to thousands of people and learning some of the best mental frameworks that there is in the world. So we hope that you enjoy this episode. And if you have any questions, please drop them down below. And any comments, we would love to hear from you guys as well. Welcome back to the Data Driven Actualization podcast. Today, we are going to talk about socializing as a path to healing. I'm here with our special guest.
Numer.
Not just Numer, Dr. Numer. Dr. Numer has officially done his PhD. How does it feel?
Very good. Very exciting times.
Yeah. Now we can switch you on to be the love doctor, which is what you were destined to be all this time, right?
Exactly. And to show you how serious we are about our love, we're even in this secret and exotic location in a deep forest.
That's right. And there's a very happy ending to my Thai tea, as you can see here, and his Coke. Cool. So what was the inspiration behind today's topic?
It was from a workshop that you hosted the previous Monday, or
a few days
ago. And obviously, depending on when this is released, we can see how far off we are with the timing. But that really highlighted a lot of the journeys, the lessons, and almost the culmination of how we ended up here.
Right. You mean behind this branch?
behind this branch and a lot of leaves in our face. But the workshop was a culmination of, I'd say, 5 years of your experience and an understanding of our journeys, as well as a few existential crises along the way.
Right.
And all of that kind of led us to synthesize today's topic,
right,
which we're very excited to present because it really gives a greater purpose to many of our endeavors around socializing. Because when we have that greater purpose, it's easy to keep that in mind and keep going even when things may feel difficult or things may feel pointless.
Yeah.
And so that's why we wanted to record this podcast, to give not only the theory behind it, which the workshop had an extensive theoretical cover on it, but to also present that theory through the lens of our own life stories.
Right.
So that you can really see how the theory gets applied in practice. Or, sometimes I did the exact opposite of what the theory would have said and seeing.
Just to test the edge cases,
exactly.
Right? it was for knowledge. It wasn't anything that had to do with personal cravings by
Yeah.
any means.
You can't have a null hypothesis without an alternate hypothesis, as they say.
That's right.
So that's why we're very excited to dive into our topic today.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about, why socialize to begin with. I guess if you clicked on this video, you have some level of interest, but I think the two important things to consider here. First one is, our relationships with others has been known to have one of the biggest correlations to our happiness, right? And if we look at the moments we remember in our lives, it's usually not the moment where you hit a PR on your deadlift or where you made tons of money. Those moments can feel like a big high when you're in that situation. But the moments you remember throughout your life are, a simple coffee with your friends or a night out with the boys where you have some funny stories to tell. Or even with your family, it's when someone's telling a story, everyone's having a good time. So it's really the quality of the relationships that we have in our
Yeah.
lives that creates not just a life full of dopamine highs, but a life of meaning. So that's the first reason. And then the second reason is I think, there's, if we think about the idea of love, right? There's this state of being in love where you are bringing up loving kindness in yourself. And these states are very popular if you've done any spiritual retreats or if you've been around, any circles in big cities in the US that put a big focus on energy work. And in that moment, you can really imagine something like a human baby or a baby animal or someone you deeply care about and bring up that sensation of love. But at the same time, your ability to bring up that sensation should also correlate with your ability to live that way
Yeah.
throughout challenging situations in your life. And one of the things about socializing, especially meeting strangers, is it can reveal a lot of limiting beliefs, a lot of stories in your own head, because especially for men who tend to be more analytical, it's a lot more unpredictable.
Yeah.
You can go to the gym, you know what reps you hit on the same exercise, like Dr. Numer hitting 315 for 8 reps in hip thrust. I know it's crazy, right? Um, and then from there, you can plan, okay, on the next workout, I'm going to do exactly this. Whereas when it comes to social situation, it's like that Mike Tyson quote, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. But when you do get punched in the face in social situations, that's when your beliefs
Figuratively.
are, yeah, that's when your beliefs are revealed to you and you get to do lots of healing in your internal world.
Yeah. And to keep expanding on this analogy, what is that when you're going to the gym, it's almost like there's a well-studied process of hypertrophy, and then there's
Mm-hmm.
clear literature which says you go lift this much, stay within these many reps in the tank,
Mm-hmm.
push this close to failure, do it consistently, and then people will have reproducibly shown results around gaining muscles. And that's the story. And obviously, nutrition and training is a lot more complicated, but there's a lot more linearity to the whole process.
Right.
Versus with socializing, it's almost kind of like you go to the gym, you put in the best effort, but then maybe your muscles have just gone through a breakup,
Right.
and they just don't want to grow.
Right.
So you can be putting all the right form, all the relevant number of reps, and doing everything right, but maybe your muscles show that day or that month just don't want to cooperate.
Mm-hmm.
And so you could be doing everything right,
Mm-hmm.
but maybe just for that month things aren't going so well.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what really I think makes socializing complicated for people who are more analytical, is because typically if you're more analytical, you're used to a certain level of linearity of steps
Mm-hmm.
and progressions, versus with socializing, there, because it really makes contact with human emotions, and as we all know, human emotions can be quite non-linear. One second someone absolutely loves you, next second they're like, I'm going to set your clothes on fire.
Mm-hmm.
um, Learning to navigate situations with a lot more non-linearity and a lot more ambiguity and a lot more ambiguous feedback loops can really be a challenge for men who are very analytical.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you combine that with, at least for me, what was the case was, in the absence of any clear feedback, I'd always go with the most negative interpretation of events.
Mm-hmm.
That can lead you to kind of dig a hole for yourself.
So what do you mean by the most negative representation of events?
Let's see, if someone didn't reply to a text, and instead of going, oh, maybe they have something in their life and it's really genuinely not about me,
Right.
or just being like, okay, maybe their phone died, or maybe they ended up taking a nap 5 minutes before the date, and next
Right.
thing you know, they're 45 minutes later.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there, obviously, one of them is any one of these out of the many anecdotes I've given is based on a true story. Um, it's very easy to assume, oh, just because they're late, they weren't interested,
Mm-hmm.
and that you got stood up. Versus in
Mm-hmm.
reality, as like ridiculous as it sounds, well, maybe they were really interested, but then actually fell asleep,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or again, there's the number of situations where we take a negative interpretation of, oh, I didn't get a text back. It's
Mm-hmm.
because I didn't do XYZ correctly, or I wasn't tall enough, attractive enough, or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
versus really being able to look at the other person's perspective, see how complex their life is,
Mm-hmm.
and see, oh, maybe they just weren't in the right place in their own life and it has nothing to do with you.
Mm-hmm.
That's feedback you're actually almost never going to get access to. And
Right.
so you're just left walking away with a level of ambiguity.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would always just assume, there's ambiguity. It means, what's the worst possible interpretation? I didn't do this enough, wasn't interesting enough. That's what
Mm-hmm.
the problem was.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's what makes it also makes socializing such an interesting avenue to consider, because it's
Mm-hmm.
this exact, almost a game of imperfect information where you never know the cards someone across from you is holding, or you never really know the
Mm-hmm.
situation that the person on the other side is going through. So you have
Mm-hmm.
to guess a lot and extrapolate a lot.
Right.
And in this guesswork and extrapolation, if your mental world isn't healthy, you
Mm-hmm.
can really come up with a lot of hurtful and limiting stories and extrapolations that can
Mm-hmm.
hurt in the way of making progress, whatever that may be defined as in the relevant context.
Yeah. Yeah, you touched on something very important, which is we have our internal world, and then there's the external world, and then there's a filter in between, which are the stories we tell ourselves about what's happening.
Yeah.
But that's never really separate from the external world, because you can take the same event, and based on the story that you tell yourself, the same event could be perceived very differently. And based on that perception, it can create a very different internal world. So, for example, you may have a day where you wake up and you didn't get much sleep, and you had a rough work day the day before, and maybe it's been a frustrating time in your life. And let's say you're walking down the street, you see a few people who are walking your way, and as they're coming close to you, all of them have a smile on their face. Now, if you're having a very rough day and that's the state you're in, you might go, oh, why are these people laughing? Are they just making fun of me? But let's say you're having an amazing day. You had a strong workout at the gym, you got those PRs
Yeah.
going, you had some oysters, you had some steak, you are feeling as fertile as a tank, and you're walking down the street and it's a sunny day, it's beautiful, you're enjoying your time. And then you see these people coming towards you and smiling. And in that case, you might just feel a sense of joy. Oh, it's nice, they're happy. Or if this is a group of women you're interested in, you might even think like, oh, maybe they're checking me out.
Yeah.
And the same situation can mean something completely different based on the stories that you hold, both in that moment, but also as a default in your life. So that's why we can never separate the external experience from the stories. And those stories also change the beliefs that we hold. So if we can look at those stories and upgrade the quality of those stories, just like, going to the eye doctor and getting your contact lens prescription updated or getting your glasses updated, you can look at the same thing but see everything with a lot more clarity. And that's truly the gift social situations can present to you if you can look at them from a healing lens. And one of the mistakes a lot of people make when it comes to socializing is they'll feel this internal lack in themselves. So they may feel like they're not very interesting, or they've been told before, oh, why do you speak like a robot? Just be a little bit more expressive, right? And then they will take that story in, they will go, okay, I am not a charismatic person. And they will carry that story. And what they'll try to do is to fight against that story. They will they will start taking on all these strategies. So they might go like, oh, before I ask a question, I say, oh, I'm really curious. What do you think about this? Because when I say I'm really curious, that makes the other person open up. And all of these strategies are valuable. But if the internal belief system is still there, then those strategies are corrupted by that belief system. And everything you're doing is to actually avoid that feeling. So you may be in a social situation and you may want to speak to someone, but because you feel boring deep down, you say, ah, oh, they probably won't be interested in me. Why should I even try? So that's why we want to take social situations as opportunities to be mindful, to observe how the inner wirings of our own mind works, so we can actually go, how am I taking this situation that's just a normal experience of life and turning that into this story? And we can follow that thread down to deeply heal. And we're going to show you how to do that throughout this episode.
Yeah. And to quickly touch on, again, the flexibility and the variety of stories that can be created, because it's so easy to think other people's stories are delusional, but mine are purely objective.
That's right.
And it's very easy to be like, my stories are based on cold and
Facts.
hard scientific data.
I got receipts.
Yeah, a friend of mine played a very highly ranked squash player, and every game was very close, but he didn't win a single game. Now, in there, the interpretation was, oh, every game was very close. That means I'm actually like quite good, and things could have gone one way or another, and the outcome could have been completely different. That was genuinely the story that he came out with. Versus I've been in situations where my story was, oh, I didn't win a single game, I'm so far away. And so here, external situation, objective external reality is still the same. Number of games, number of points still remains the same, but you can have two completely different stories that can suit the same objective external reality. And one is a lot more productive and helpful of an interpretation and a belief, and the other one is almost not as helpful and a lot more disparaging. So it really is important to see the quality of the stories we're telling ourselves and the usefulness of the stories we're telling ourselves. And again, I think the reason we touch on socializing here, or the reason the workshop was called Socializing as a path to healing and not like calculus as a path to healing or lifting weights as a
That would be
path
the
to
type of
healing.
workshop you would host.
Yeah.
Right after the AI model detects your mom. Happens.
um, the reason we chose socializing specifically as the avenue was that it brings up a lot more triggers,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a lot fewer ways to cope with it
Mm-hmm.
compared to maybe other scenarios where with calculus, it's like, well, there's not as many triggers as much as one trigger
Well, speak
repeatedly
for
coming. Yeah.
yourself. Speak for yourself.
um,
That triple
versus, yeah,
derivatives is quite rough, quite triggering.
the Jacobian and the Hessian.
Oh, mate.
Um, yeah, but socializing brings up, puts us in the vicinity of a lot more triggers. And so this really gives us an opportunity to look deeply into the stories that come up. And I
Mm-hmm.
think another thing that always stuck with me was the reason I used to dislike socializing, um, working on those skills, was because it was something that required me to potentially fail in public,
Mm.
versus I was like, wow, any other endeavor I want to get better at,
Mm-hmm.
I can fail in private, get better, and then just magically show up in the world
Mm.
when I'm ready, kind of
Wait,
like
is
my
that why
bachata.
you practice bachata by yourself? That makes so much more sense now.
um, versus with socializing, even to get better, there's only there you can't really talk to a mirror, um,
Right.
and there's not really much you can do to improve by yourself, and so
Mm-hmm.
it really requires you to accept the possibility of failing very publicly,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the only way to
Mm-hmm.
improve.
Yeah.
And that journey in itself has a lot of treasure and a lot of realizations
Mm-hmm.
that carry over to every other aspect of life. And so, in true analytical fashion, going through a socializing journey and using it to heal is a very high ROI activity.
That's right. And obviously, we talk about the potential triggers that can arise socially, but at the same time, it has tons of incredible payoff on the other side. So it's kind of the difference between, using a trading strategy that's really safe and long term versus using a strategy where you can win a lot, but you can also lose a
All in
lot.
on Dogecoin.
That's right. And the benefit in that, right, is we're all social beings, and one of the core modalities of healing is a relational modality, which is purely based on relationship. And what's interesting about that is years ago, I don't remember the exact year, don't quote me on the history, but there was a time at which behavioral therapy was really popular, right? And all these behavioral therapy people were like, yeah, if you don't have the behavior that you want, change your behavior, and that will change your thoughts and your feelings. Now, at that time, someone came up with the concept of relationship oriented therapy. And this person was like, I am just going to deeply care about my clients and I'm going to hold them in their higher self, in their best self. And it turned out around that time, relationship based therapy was more effective than any behavior based therapy. And the people who supported the behavioral change were very upset about this.
Yeah.
So they were like, well, you're just changing their behavior really based on the relationship you hold. So you're still changing the behavior. They didn't want to accept that someone deeply caring about their client as a therapist, or someone even deeply caring about a close friend, a family member, could create much more change than this eloquent system
Yeah.
that they created. And I think that's where, on the upside of this, when you build a life with friends who truly care about you, with, as pleasant of a family relationship you can have with people in your family, with people you work with, just being really open and honest and being really there for each other, cultivating those relationships also has massive upside. So, in a way, we're talking about how triggering things can be, but on the other side, don't forget how healing this can also be, because so many times, especially when I was terrified of meeting people after I lost around 65 pounds last year of high school, and I went into college in the US as a random guy from Turkey, thinking that I was still fat deep down.
Asking whether you ride camels to school.
That's right, which we do. I have a few at my garage back home. But being in that situation, some of the most healing experiences I had were going up to people I was intimidated by and seeing they were actually incredibly friendly
Yeah.
and incredibly open and incredibly loving, even when I was super awkward. Like, there was a time at which I remember going up to this girl and saying, "Hey," I mean, I can't even imitate the
Yeah.
tonality now of the fear I had at that time. It's like, "Hey, excuse me. I thought you looked very nice." And I remember just running away from that situation. And I still remember she was like, "Oh my God, thank you so much." She was super nice about it. I think that's where, if you are afraid of socializing, if anxiety is arising, that's not because of the people in the outside world. That's actually because your internal world is so disturbed based on the beliefs that you have been handed to, that you're projecting that onto the outside world, because it's more scary to say, actually, I haven't spoken to every single person in my
Yeah.
city, so I don't know if people in my city are friendly or not. So I have the responsibility to go ahead and find out. It's a lot scarier to do that. So it's very important to recognize, yes, socializing can reveal a lot of triggers, but on the other side, as you build your skill, as you heal, it can also be incredibly healing to reveal your authentic self to the world and to feel true acceptance
Yeah.
and true intimacy with yourself and with the world.
Yeah. And I think we've kind of touched on this in previous podcasts as well. But when we do talk about healing,
Mm-hmm.
we do mean it may be in a slightly different way than more conventional understandings of the word. Because when we do say healing, it very much is something that's about building capacity and capability to take on bigger challenges
Right,
rather than having more sophisticated ways to dodge taking on challenges
right.
and feeling very good even
Mhm.
after dodging taking on challenges.
Yeah,
Um, and when you look at healing from that lens, it requires a lot more proactive work, and it really, in many ways, this look at healing as the ability to take on bigger challenges and build more capacity, in many ways really unites all the camps of self-development, in my opinion. Obviously that
hmm.
the
No, I think that's a fact, really. They should just agree.
yeah. um, it unites all the camps in that the one camp that's all about going hard, staying hard, um, in the Goggins sense, um,
Right.
that is all about the grind and the hustle, and then the other camp that's all about expressing, feeling, um, relaxing, slowing down,
Mm,
healing. In many ways, it the definition of healing we talk about is a healthy integration of both,
yeah.
that understands when to slow down, but that also understands when to hustle.
Hmm.
And
And to hustle without as much tension.
yeah, because I remember when I'd be doing um, big like physical endurance training sessions,
Hmm.
and I'd be really pushing my heart rate to about 200, and I'd
Hmm.
have to keep it there because I'd be simulating like a very very extreme match.
Hmm.
Um, at those points, my legs would feel like someone was pouring lava down them, and
Hmm.
I felt like my heart was just going to explode out of my chest,
Hmm.
and the visual field was kind of just starting to get blurry, and you couldn't see straight, couldn't think straight. And in those situations, in one being from maybe the stay hard camp, it's easy to just use that as a way to dissociate,
Hmm.
um, versus a more sophisticated approach that you can use is to still, instead of dissociating, really seeing those as sensations. And obviously, easier said than done. And I'm nowhere near perfect at doing this, but seeing those extreme feelings and extreme sensations just as sensations, and almost breaking the chain um, of interpretation of these sensations and feeling a lot more at peace with them, can give you even more expanded ability to also think while feeling these sensations, as opposed to kind of just being like, when will this end? How do I not feel this pain?
Right.
So in many ways, you're not only, you still have the resilience that you have from staying hard, but you also have added cognitive abilities. So there is a very clear advantage to healing in an integrated way and taking that perspective. But then I think, and another advantage as well is that because there's less pain, there's less of a need to prove things to other people. You're
Yeah.
more willing to know when to stop and put the brakes, instead of overtraining and killing yourself figuratively,
Right.
and then hurting your results in the long term.
Yeah.
So when we do talk about healing, we talk about it more from this perspective of building capacity to take on additional challenges, so that it's not just something we do sitting on a couch and feel good about, not that activity. But
Uh-oh. Do you see? Someone's maybe doing that as they're watching the podcast on the other side of the screen. Oh, dangerous.
But it's
But we
something.
feel special.
Yeah. What was I saying? But it's something that gives us a very actionable skill in our day-to-day life.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the three types of faulty mental patterns and how they show up in social situations. So then we can tie that into the 5 stages of healing. And again, these are all things that I've learned in the past year from one of my mentors, Kim Barta. So definitely check out his interviews. But the first style of faulty mental program is what's called an interjection. So the way I like to think about this is, if you're in the tech world, or even if you're not, you've probably heard about the Trojan horse virus, which is basically a program that comes into your computer. And at the beginning, it feels like a useful program. Maybe you get it from a friend or a domain that looks somewhat trustworthy, but has like a small typo there. Don't pay much attention. Boom, click on the download link. At the beginning, there's no problem. And then eventually, this virus just slowly takes over your system until your system is basically crying for help. Interjections work the same way. These are false beliefs we take away from the outside world, from our environment, or from someone else, and we make it mean something about ourselves. So, for example, imagine I was a 4 or 5 year old kid and I was just dancing on the table in the living room. And at the same time, my dad's about to have a meeting, right? So he's on his laptop, he's doing some stuff, he's preparing for a meeting. He goes, okay, stop doing that. It's not the time. So what happens in that moment is you internalize the belief that if I express myself, then it will make other people upset, or a variation of that, because you don't have the cognitive capacity to separate what your dad's actually asking from you. So that's the first type of belief. The second type of belief is a projection. This is when we have an internal disturbance and we put that disturbance in the outside world. And usually we can tell this is happening because we feel angry, we feel judgmental, we feel frustrated, we feel upset with the outside world. So an example of this in social situations is some guys, they're scared to socialize, or maybe they feel deep down that they're a boring person. And what they do is, instead of facing that fear, they will go, oh, my city sucks for socializing, or I'm too old to socialize, I can't do this anymore, right? and they project this idea that their city is not a good place to socialize. And what's funny is for every person who says that in one city, there's someone else who's absolutely crushing it socially. So with a projection, we own that and we can see, okay, this outside thing that I'm frustrated with is making me leak my energy and leak my power. So if I can go, what's something about me that's making me frustrated towards this? I see that in myself and I take that energy back. And the third type of faulty mental program that comes up in social situations is a split ego state. So this could be when two parts of you or more parts of you are in conflict. So for example, you know, you might meet a woman who's pretty attractive and there's a part of you that wants to just see things unfolding with her. But then there may be another part of you that knows actually she's not the most compatible person for me long term. And these parts may get in conflict, like, oh no, but I really want to go on a date with this girl because she's attractive, and if my guy friends saw me with her, they would respect me more. Or the genuine part of you might say, but she doesn't have the qualities that I want in someone I want to be with. So that's an example of a split ego state. And in that situation, what we can do is we can see the positive intention on both parts and start having these parts talking to each other so we can progress on a path to healing.
Yeah, and what's interesting about all three of these is when you start to play with them, almost from a meta belief perspective, you can really start to see the flexibility in distinctions and rules that we have.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, where I grew up, people aren't typically very tall.
Mm-hmm.
And so I never thought of myself as being short.
Right.
And so
But
when
you're
I,
also 6'9", Dr.
yeah,
Namek.
exactly, precisely 6'9.42.
That's right.
But, and so this whole perception around height and what it means with attractiveness, that never came up in my mind, even though I'm like 5'7", until I went to the US and I saw how big of a deal it felt for some
Yeah.
people I knew.
Yeah.
And so that was something that in my world, because that belief hadn't been given to me,
Mm-hmm.
it genuinely didn't make a difference. And it actually never really came up as well in
Mm-hmm.
situations where I
Right.
never had anyone go like, oh, you're not tall enough, therefore nothing's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
If anything, people will always just seem to be like shifting the boundary, being like, oh, you're 5'7", okay, that's great. That's just the right height,
Yeah.
you know?
That will do it.
Versus seeing other people who were maybe like 5'8", 5'9", but then because they were so stuck
Mm-hmm.
with that, for some reason 6 seems to be like the arbitrary cutoff we've gone with.
That's right.
And seeing friends who were like 5'9", but
Or
because
5'11".
yeah, but because
But on their Tinder bio,
yeah,
it's 6'1".
but because that belief had such a strong hold on them, all they saw was confirmation of that.
Mm-hmm.
But then once you can start to play around with this, you can
Mm-hmm.
really see the flexibility. Because I think another interject is it's totally fine to message someone on a concrete piece of glass and plastic, and then meeting up is completely like sane.
Mm-hmm.
But then um, fast forward the clock an arbitrary 12 hours, and instead of messaging them through a screen,
Mm-hmm.
the same symbols are conveyed through sound,
Mm-hmm.
and in a location that's a day-to-day location, and suddenly that's like,
Whoa, whoa,
whoa,
whoa,
whoa,
whoa. What
whoa.
are you doing there?
One is like completely normal, and one is completely like you're a deviant and an aberrant
That's
if you
right.
do it.
So to simplify what you said to human terms, Dr. Namer is saying, for us who don't have PhDs, we need to be simplified a bit, right? So he's saying there's a difference between messaging someone on an app
Yeah,
versus meeting someone in real life. And for where we're at in society, messaging someone on an app and swiping on hundreds of people a day, it's like, yeah, super normal.
yeah,
But then if you speak to a few girls a day who you were attracted to. It's like, whoa, 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 what are you doing?
Either you're like desperate or you're trying too hard,
Right.
or it's just strange.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's so interesting to break down these interjects we have around it, because
we have a listener.
Because you can go to other parts of the world where, if anything, the opposite's going to hold.
Right.
You swipe on an app, it's like, dude, what? The whole usual countries with entire faceless profiles.
Right.
So interjects are very, very interesting for that reason, and seeing how much of a hold they can have over our behaviors. Same with projections as well. Not feeling enough and then blaming it on external circumstances, or
right.
feeling angry at yourself for maybe not standing up for yourself in certain situations, and then projecting that onto someone else and being angry at someone else, or projecting responsibility as well.
Yeah.
I think that's a big one that we see.
Yeah.
And same with split ego states, seeing how, because with split ego states, what's very interesting is that, this came up in conversations over the past few days after your 4 a.m. call, but it's even with split ego states, it's interesting to see that we typically let one be the dictator,
right,
and then the rest are either silenced or seen as parts that are unimportant. So, for example, one part can feel like, this will never work, and I'm just going to keep failing. But then there's another part that says, this can work, it's worth trying. But then somehow, at least in my case, I always let the this will never part work just kind of have the top position in the hierarchy.
Yeah.
As well as sometimes we may even find parts that we didn't even know we had. So finding parts that actually believe that things will work in the first place. Because I remember a lot of times, I think you told this to a lot of people, was like, well, the fact that you're even showing up to this call or considering having this conversation around getting guidance means that there's a part of you that believes it can work. It may be a bit hard to see it.
Right.
And so when you can actually map out split ego states, if anything, seeing it, it's almost like the golden projection is there now that we've set a scientific term for it, that takes the charge away from all these different parts and allows us to see them a lot more impartially and just see them as parts.
Right, yeah.
And there's a lot of healing power in that, because now you can really step back and say, that is a part, but then this is a part as well, as opposed to having to live with the real me is the one that'll never believe it, and then the part that says, it can happen, is just like some small glimmer of hope that doesn't belong there.
Yeah, exactly. There's lots to discover in social situations about healing, and you might be thinking, but how do I know where's my interjects, where's my projections, where's my split ego states? And that's why, as we wrap up this episode, we're going to quickly cover the 5 stages of healing, because the DGI is being a dictator and running out of battery. So at this point, although we can build more of a democracy in our internal world, apparently when it comes to editing and recording, we're still at the mercy of our AI overlords.
It's pulling a Numer and running out of battery.
To be fair, you've been doing really well on that front. So the first stage of healing is being unaware, right? This is when you don't even know you have a problem. You might be like, I'm not unaware, I'm watching this podcast. But we all have parts of ourselves that are in unaware. So if a part is unaware, it's usually a part that wants to defend its position. So the best thing we can do if a part of us is unaware, or someone we know is unaware, is not to actually tell them, you're wrong, look at the facts, but to hold them in unconditional love. So to bring that for yourself or for people you love, what you can do is imagine something or someone that brings up a lot of warmth for you, and seeing that part of yourself from that lens, or the other person who's in an aware stage from that lens. Now, from there, eventually, you may move to symptom aware. This is when you know the symptoms of the problems you're facing. So maybe in a social situation, you feel anxious, you feel tension in your chest, or you want to say something, but you're not saying something. When you see someone you're attracted to, the first thing you want to do is to run away rather than to go say something. These are all symptoms that are showing you something in your experience is not right. So anything like frustration, anger, things like that could be symptoms. But this could also be like literally studying every single book about socializing without leaving your home. That's a symptom in
The
itself.
manual, the 300-page
That's
dating
right.
manual.
That's right. Yeah, you read all the research studies and listen to all the modern wisdom episodes about social science, but you still haven't left your house. That's a symptom in itself. From the symptom, we can identify the trigger. To identify the trigger, we ask ourselves, what happens right before this symptom arises? And we get very specific around what that trigger is. So you might say, oh, around attractive woman, I get really nervous. But what type of attractive woman? Do you have a certain type? Is it a certain age range? Okay, what's different about a 70-year-old old lady who's super friendly and super caring to you versus a 25-year-old your dream girl? So the more specific you can get around your trigger, the more cues you will have about the story that you create. But then you could also go and reality check yourself a bit and think to yourself, okay, what's different about talking to someone who's in this age range, who in this context that doesn't trigger me, but in this other situation, there's something in me that gets triggered. Now, when you're at the trigger aware stage is when you start gaining your power back. Because the question you ask to move from the trigger and to see the internal process you create, which are the thoughts, feelings, stories that turn into a shadow pattern, is the question of how am I taking this external event and turning it into a trigger? So you take full responsibility and you realize there's nothing in the external world that is a problem. It's all internal. And this can be a drastic perspective to take, and it can be very difficult at the beginning. You may really want to go, what do you mean? Of course I'm supposed to be nervous because it's my biology. It's evolutionary biology to be scared about this woman, right? But again, we can take responsibility for that. It's also evolutionary biology to live in a tribe. We don't really do that anymore, right?
To not watch TikTok.
Yeah, to not watch TikTok, but it seems like there's a lot of that going on.
Yeah.
So then we start understanding the story we create about this external event. And as we understand the story, we will eventually find ourselves to either a belief, a feeling, or a sensation. And when that arises, we can ask ourselves, when's the first time I felt this sensation? Or when's the first time I felt this story to be true? And if you just sit with that question long enough, sometimes this means like 10 minutes, sometimes this means a quick trip to the bathroom, sometimes this means like a few days.
Not to do what the bathroom is actually for biological processes, not.
That's right.
Not for the.
It's not where you lock yourself in and start crying. But hey, if that's what you need to do to heal, we support your healing. So you get to the original story. And once you are in the original story, you can go, okay, it's an interjection, it's a projection, or this is a split ego state. And from there, if it's an interjection, just like you took it from the outside world, you can give it back to the situation or the person it came from. We're going to keep recording episodes so we can go more in depth about this at a future episode. This is just a high-level overview. For a projection, you want to re-own it, and split ego state, you want to integrate it. And this is how the 5 stages can appear in social situations. And the beauty of socializing is the world can be so chaotic that there's lots of triggers, especially if this is something you're scared of. So now with this perspective, every person you speak to, every time you step into courage, you get to discover something new about yourself. So there's truly nothing to be afraid of. You either win by discovering a symptom, going into the trigger, going into the internal process, discovering the core seed, and completely transforming your internal world. Or you also win by building the social life that you want. Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Yeah, I'll keep this quick. Something I've been really liking about reality checks, as well as kind of turning the story on itself, is you can have a thought around this won't work for me, but then when you do a reality check, thinking of, I'm forgetting the exact term in propositional logic, but if I believe that doing this approach is not going to work for me, that means that the only way to truly check that in reality is saying, if I were, so let's say the limiting belief that's coming up is around dating a woman, then you can do a reality check around feeling like things are never going to work. But then what I've been doing a lot as well is turning it on its head and taking it to the extreme and saying, am I willing to believe that if I go and do this for every single woman in existence, I will get every single no?
Right,
And it's like, okay, clearly I'm not willing to believe that.
right.
So when I can actually change the wording, because they're actually equivalent sentences saying this isn't going to work,
Right.
or going and doing
So you
this isn't going to get
extrapolate
me.
the sample size, basically.
Yeah, but also you look at the negative of the, almost, I believe it's the contrapositive of the statement,
Right.
where it's the same statement, but you're kind of applying a negation to it and saying, my
Oh,
approach
like
isn't going,
math.
yeah, my
Right.
approach isn't going to work. But then you reframe it so that it has the same implication, but it's almost like a double negative where I can go speak to every single woman in my city and I will get rejected every time.
Right.
Equivalent beliefs. And then you can look at the other equivalent belief in this more negative form. And there it's very easy to go, okay, that clearly
That's not
isn't going to
true.
be true.
Yeah.
Versus when I phrase it this way, it seems to rob me a lot more of my power. And so when you can look at it from that clarity check and do kind of a reality check like that, I find that also helps me work through a lot of beliefs that come up.
Yeah. Super useful. All right, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. We're gonna end this with that super useful tip. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy this and you resonate with the content we put out, I want you to go to the link down below and watch the video on my exact system to get what you want in your life without sacrificing your peace and authenticity. We'll see you in the next episode. Thank you.